Hey everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy, and today we're going to be talking about foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is a device that is used to hint at events later on in the story. It can do things like add legitimacy to a plot twist or create suspense. It can also be used to thread in a mystery or set up clues, and for that reason can be a great device for creating intricacy in your plot. Now there are two main types of foreshadowing, direct foreshadowing and indirect foreshadowing. Direct foreshadowing is when the outcome is directly hinted at. We get direct information told for us. The reader will probably be aware that this is a hint or some type of foreshadowing. But there's also indirect foreshadowing. This is when the outcome is only indirectly hinted at. These hints are subtle, and it's likely here that the reader won't realize that this was an example of foreshadowing until much later on. So let's start out by talking about some direct foreshadowing technique. First of all is the narrator. Your narrator can be a great tool for foreshadowing. This is when the narrator of the story provides crucial information but doesn't provide context. A great example of this is in the novel Bel Canto by Ann Patchett. In this novel, in the first chapter, the omniscient narrator hints that a number of characters are going to die at the end of the story, but we don't know the circumstances. As a result, this creates an incredible amount of tension throughout the novel because you know that these characters are going to die, but you don't know when or how. Doing so also removes the ending from feeling like shock value, so even though it kind of ruins the surprise, it actually makes the ending more powerful. Number 2, the pre-scene. This scene is like a subtle mirror of a more important scene that's going to happen later on. It's like a toned down reflection of a later moment. A great example of this would be of Mice and Men. At the beginning of this book, there's a scene where someone puts down a dog to put the dog out of its misery, which mirrors the climax of the book where a similar thing happens, except with a person. Next up would be the name drop. By dropping the name of a person, place, thing, event, organization, or whatever, you're telling the reader that this is going to be important later on. Even if when the name is first dropped we don't really know what it is, it's kind of saying, pay attention to this, it's going to be important. Number 4 is the prophecy. This is when the reader knows a specific dramatic event is going to occur, but dramatic irony gives it a different kind of impact than what we might be expecting. A great example of this is at the beginning of Macbeth. The witches say that Macbeth will be king, and that Banquo's children will be kings, but he won't be himself. Similar to the narrator technique, the difference is that the information is coming from within the story, often in the form of a prophecy, rather than just from the narrator. And finally would be the prologue. Now, a prologue can do many things, but one thing they can do is foreshadow. In one of the prologues for Jurassic Park, it stated that a company called InGen created a genetic crisis, but that everyone involved had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. This, first of all, sets up so much intrigue, but it's also a form of foreshadowing. Now, what about some indirect foreshadowing techniques? First of all would be the innocuous statement. Sometimes a statement that kind of just seems offhanded has a lot more relevance later on. For example, in Star Wars Episode 2, Obi-Wan says to Anakin, "Why do I have a feeling that you will be the death of me?" which turns out to have a lot more relevance than it seemed at the time, when it turns out to be true. Number 2 would be the pathetic fallacies. Pathetic fallacy is when the character's emotions are impressioned onto the natural world. For example, it's raining because the character is sad. Basically, the natural world reflects the character's emotional state. This is subtle, but it can be used for an atmospheric sort of foreshadowing. You can set up mood and tone through how the character is interpreting their natural environment. You can use the natural world to set up a sense of foreboding and kind of hint that something bad or ominous is lurking in the future. Number 3 would be symbolism. A symbol is something that represents something else within the context of a story. Many symbols are universally recognized, so if you open with one, readers can clue into what this means. So for example, at the start of Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms, falling leaves are used as a symbol of death, and because this symbol is used relatively often, readers can clue into the fact that death is lurking somewhere in the future. Number 4 would be through metaphor and simile. Similar with pathetic fallacy, metaphor and simile can also be used for some foreshadowing. You could compare something to an object that has relevance later on, or create a sort of parallel with a metaphor or simile. You could also use it similar to pathetic fallacy to create more of an emotional sense of foreboding. If you want to learn more about writing descriptions and using them effectively, I'll leave a link to a video on that in the cards. And finally would be the object. This is the idea of Chekhov's gun, which we also have a video on, so I will also leave a link to that. You can set up later events by introducing objects that are going to be important within those events. For example, in the 3rd book in a series of unfortunate events, at the beginning of the book, Mr. Poe gives the Baudelaires some peppermints, even though they can't eat them because they're allergic. Later on, they eat those peppermints to get themselves out of a sticky situation. At the start, the peppermints might have seemed like just kind of a throwaway detail, but they ended up tying in really neatly to the plot. So those are 10 different ways of creating foreshadowing in your story. If you want to learn more, you can check out the blog post linked in the description, and remember to subscribe for new writing, editing, and publishing videos every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time!